I'm in the dark a little bit about an incident that apparently happened this morning in France. Barbara told me that there was an attack in a synagogue in Nice, and that there's injured people, just an anti-Semitic attack at a synagogue there. I just want to, it's a difficult time to be Jewish all over the world, and express our solidarity with all those who are affected by this attack, and we'll say a prayer for all those who are injured and their families, that everybody should fully recover from this incident, and that our synagogue should be spared further attacks like these. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to be away for a stretch this summer, and a special thank you to all of the volunteers who helped fill in while the rabbi was away. It was not a quiet summer here, many different ways, and needed volunteers to help out. So I want to personally express my gratitude to everybody who was able to play a role, and gratitude also for families where I feel very guilty needing to have been here for you and not being able to. So this is a book, the book of Deuteronomy, that is sometimes overlooked because it is, for the most part, a book filled with repetitions of laws and stories that we already know from previous books in the Torah, right? The formal word for the book of Deuteronomy is Mishneh Torah, a second repetition of the Torah. So sometimes we don't give it the attention that it deserves. And it's quite an important book because it's dealing with the fundamental question of how this group of freed slaves, now a new generation, just on the border, ready to enter and conquer the land that they are promised, how they are to build a society and what risks they are supposed to avoid. And actually, in this particular Parsha, in Parashat Eikev, maybe the most relevant and fundamental question is asked and answered. That is the question of what is the great challenge of a free society? What is going to lead to the people's downfall? If you asked me that question, what is the challenge, the greatest challenge that leads to the downfall of free societies? I would say that it is about getting the balance wrong between individual freedoms, that is, the freedom I have and you all have as individuals to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it, and also the need for the common good. That is, the idea that my freedoms need to be curtailed sometimes because I live in a society with other people. The common good and my individual freedom, it's a balance. And if you get that balance wrong, then the social order can break apart. That's why you need individual rights, you need courts, you need institutions that are constantly working at that balance, making sure that we can all live together, but in a way where we're able to fully live out individual aspirations as individuals and a society. That would be my answer. I sound pretty smart, maybe. It's not Moses' answer. Moses' answer is shocking, completely different. Not something I think any one of us would guess. What is the real challenge of a free society? Hishamer lecha, pen tishkach et Hashem Elokecha. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Levilti shmor mitzvotav u'mishpotav v'chukotav. You will fail to observe the commandments, the laws, the decrees, asher anochi mitzavecha hayom, that I am giving you today. I'll continue just in English. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and your possessions increase, and all that you have is multiplied, your heart will become proud. You will forget what the Lord your God did, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. If you ever forget the Lord your God, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. This is not the challenge I was talking about. This is something totally different. This is Moses turning to that new generation and saying something very surprising, saying to them, you think the challenge was 40 years of wandering in the wilderness with no possessions, nobody to take care of you, vulnerable, alone? That is not the challenge. The challenge is going to happen later. When you enter this land, it's not going to be easy for you. You're going to become affluent, and you're going to be well off. And that's when you are counterintuitively in the greatest danger. That is when the spiritual trial will really begin. The late Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, centers in on Moses' words here. You forget God and you will surely be destroyed. And he demonstrates that this counterintuitive proposition has been shown to be true over and over again by outstanding historical scholars of sociology and civilization. He mentions the writing of Ibn Khaldun, who was one of the first to demonstrate an overarching theory of the decline and fall of civilizations. Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis in the 14th century, an Arab sociologist, philosopher, and historian, widely acknowledged to be one of the greatest social scientists of the Middle Ages and considered by many to be the father of historiography, sociology, economics, and demography studies. He taught that all great civilizations begin by military victory, by being very powerful or very energetic or very driven, but then they settle down, they become affluent, and they begin to lose social cohesion. People begin to become more interested in themselves and less interested about their neighbors. Social cohesion is gone. They're no longer able to win battles, and they lose those battles to other peoples who are less affluent than they are, but more driven. In the 18th century, Italian scholar Giambattista Vico also sketched this same picture of the sequence that every civilization goes through. His way of putting it is, first people worry about what's necessary, but then they worry about what's useful, and then they attend to their comforts, and then they start delighting in pleasures, and then they start concentrating on luxuries, which leads them to become dissolute, and they finally go mad, squandering their estates. They get into a situation like Canada at the moment, where we build up massive levels of personal debt so we can enjoy everything today and squander our tomorrows. In the middle of the 20th century, closer to our era, British professor Arnold J. Toynbee compiled an extraordinary 12-volume study of history. And in his exhaustive study of 21 major civilizations, he concludes that extraordinary civilizations are not destroyed from the outside, they are ruined from within. They commit suicide. For him, the pattern is that of a rich elite class destroying the culture, killing productivity, taking the wealth and the faith of the majority, and creating a dictatorship of control, leading to decline. And just about 10 years ago, Niall Ferguson, one of the most fascinating intellectuals in the world today, wrote his book, Civilization, contending that the West had 6 institutions that made their society work better than anyone else's. They were competition, science, democracy, medicine, consumerism, and work ethic. 6 things that made the West the best of everybody else. Today, all 6 institutions are on the decline, and we're in danger of losing them. What do you notice about all 4 of these historians? Well, their conclusions sound almost nothing like my answer to the initial question, and a heck of a lot similar to what Moses was saying a few thousand years ago. Notably, that the real challenge is not poverty, the real challenge is success and affluence, because if you are affluent, you risk forgetting what you went through to get there in the first place. When you forget about your past and you concentrate only on the present, then inequalities grow. A few people get mega rich while everybody else gets mega poor. And there's a loss of social cohesion, and people stop caring about the welfare of other people. Society grows weaker, and eventually you get to defeat and devastation. And I think you have to be blind not to recognize at least some of these trends in the Canada that we are living in today and in other major Western countries. So how do you defeat this decline? As much as Moses warns us about what the challenge is going to be, he also spends the entirety of Sefer Devarim, the last book of the Torah, answering for us, this is how you're going to beat that decline. This is how you're going to overcome it. This is how you're going to endure as a society on the land the Lord your God has given you. The first thing he says you have to do, and he says this throughout Sefer Devarim, is never forget who you are and where you came from. Avadim hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim. It's not by accident that we need to repeat these words every year firmly. When our young kids are around the table at Passover, we were slaves unto Pharaoh in Egypt. Sure, now we're eating at a fancy meal around the table, but once we had no food. Once we had no possessions. We were all once slaves. And as a people, we shared a common fate and a common destiny, so we are required to care about one another today. A people who forgets who they are will never know where they are going. Number 2, also throughout Sefer Devarim, tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue. Not only are you going to remember where you came from, but you're going to work on creating a society where there is the rule of law, where people feel that everyone is behaving responsibly, where there is equal opportunity, when institutions are created to give genuine help for people who are poor, we build a society that champions the dignity of the individual. That is justice, justice shall you pursue. And number 3, we have to recognize the presence of a power greater than ourselves. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Always remember that it is God who led you to where you are, and it is God you have to serve, because if you are not serving God in the long run, the only alternative is serving yourself. And when a society is filled with people who are only interested in serving themselves, it will certainly fall apart. I would call everyone's attention to a fascinating article written just a few months ago in The Atlantic by Derek Thompson. The article is called "The True Cost of the Church-Going Bust." Thompson is Jewish by birth, but he describes himself as an agnostic. In the article, he writes that he had long dismissed religion as, quote, beset by scandal and entangled in noxious politics, end quote. More recently, however, he recognizes that maybe religion, for all of its faults, again, quote, works a bit like a retaining wall to hold back the destabilizing pressure of American hyper-individualism, which threatens to swell and spill over in its absence, end quote. For Thompson, a relationship with organized religion provides many things at once, not only a connection to the divine, but also a historical narrative of identity, a set of rituals to organize the week and year, and a community. He cites a 2023 study by the Pew Research Center that reports that religiously affiliated Americans are more likely to volunteer, more likely to feel satisfied with their community and social life, and more likely to say they have friends and don't feel lonely. And he concludes, clearly today more Americans are spending Sunday mornings on their couches, and it's affecting the quality of our collective life. An American society didn't simply lose its religion without finding a replacement. Instead, we have developed a new relationship with technology, with a resulting digital life that is disembodied, asynchronous, shallow, and solitary. Religious rituals are the opposite in almost every respect. Religion encourages contact with the divine in the presence of others. It is typically embodied, synchronous, deep, and collective. The last line of his essay: it took decades for Americans to lose their religion. It might take decades to understand the entirety of what we have all lost. So there it is. For Thompson and many others who once sneered at the credulousness of believers, publicly admitting now that maybe they were wrong, and admitting that the decline of religion has not ushered in the secular messianic age of universal peace and joy that they expected. It's extraordinary. And the critique centers not on the decline of civic institutions, but the decline of our individual quality of life, the loss of meaning, the loss of social cohesion. Maybe if everyone had just studied a little bit of Sefer Devarim, they wouldn't have been so quick to dismiss the crucial role of faith and faith institutions in addressing these problems in the first place, in preventing the decline of civilization and society. For I contend that it is actually religion, faith in God, belief in a power greater than ourselves, that is the only thing that allows nations to defeat the decline and fall that happens to every great society. Or in simple words, a society is only as strong as its faith. That is what Moses is telling the people before they enter the land, and it still remains true today. Shabbat Shalom.